Hello everyone, welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to a very special video where I will be ranking and reviewing every single short film nominated at this year's Oscars. I wanted to do this video. It took me a little while because I had to first sit down and watch all 15 of these shorts, and thankfully, because they make these so accessible nowadays on different streaming services, on YouTube, but also in theaters. The Shorts TV does a great program where they show every short in a little bundle, animated, live action, and documentary. And this is a category, these are three categories that I've never fully completed. I've always tried to watch every single nominee every year, and this year I'm trying as well. At the time of recording, I have 9 films left, but 15 of the films that get nominated every year are these short films, and sometimes I kind of put them on the back burner. But this year I heard such great things about these shorts that I really wanted to check them out, and because a lot of them were readily available for me to revisit, and because I just wanted to have that like completionist mindset this year, even though I'm probably not going to finish all of the films nominated for Oscars. I'm missing a few. I've still got to watch some of the below the line categories, some documentary features, some international features. But the short films I really wanted to prioritize this year because I really am such a fan of the medium. The idea of telling a story at the adequate length you need to tell it, not needing to drag it out for a feature-length film. But also, this is where we see a lot of up-and-coming filmmakers that are going to go to become huge, big names. I mean, Martin McDonagh, who's nominated for Best Screenplay this year, won an award for a short film. A lot of these award contenders that pop up later on got their start making short films, and it's something inspiring to see as an aspiring creator as well, and someone who does essentially little short films every now and then here on the channel, even though it is more of like a podcast setting. These are essentially little short films because I'm editing stuff together and I'm planning out a script for some shows. Sometimes I'm going off the cuff and it's more of a documentary short because it's just the words that are happening in the moment. Maybe not the best comparison, but I do love short films, and I do want to get right into it. I don't want this to be such a huge video because this is 15 films, but they are short films, so I'm going to give a little summary on each one as I rank them from 5 to 1 in each category, and then I'm going to give my overall thoughts. I'm not going to go too deep into some of these because these are short films, so a lot of like big plot points and stuff happen very early, and I don't want to spoil that for you, especially because some of these have some great reveals. So we're going to start with the animated category. This is the one I started with. This is the first set I saw. And this one, I think, had the highest highs, but also some of the lowest lows. If I look at all 15 of these shorts, I think this had some films that I'm going to revisit a lot because I was just so charmed by them. And then some films that I was so off put by, especially some that are considered big category contenders here. So let's start at number 5, and we have The Flying Sailor. The Flying Sailor is a very short film. I know these are all shorts, but amongst the shorts, this feels even shorter. This comes in at about 8 minutes with credits. So it's really a film that you're in and you're out. And I think that is why it landed lowest on this list, because it just didn't have enough time to make an impact on me. The story basically is based on this explosion that happened in 1917 when these 2 ships crashed in this harbor, and this man basically got like projectile shot into the air, and essentially was flying for a portion of time. Not actually flying like Peter Pan fictionalized flying, but he was in the air long enough to where he got that experience of flying. And this man flew about 4 kilometers before landing completely unharmed, except for his wearing nothing but his boots. And this film kind of illustrates that. It shows in real time this guy flying through the air. And it was just such an interesting story. I think as a short film, I wanted a little bit more. The animation of the 5 is probably the least captivating for me personally, but I think just the fact that this story exists is such an anomaly that I think people should check it out, or at least read up on this story. It's one of those things where you can't tell this story in a full-length film, and that's, I think, why a short film functions really well for this. It didn't rope me in as much, but I do recommend reading up on that story because it's such a miraculous thing that really only happens once in a blue moon, if ever. This is like a once in a lifetime thing that's ever happened, and the fact that it's a true story, it's wild. Number 4, we have probably the front runner to win the award, and that is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. This on its surface looked like it was my cup of tea. I mean, J.J. Abrams produced it. I'm a big J.J. Abrams defender. I know he's lost a few people after Rise of Skywalker, but I'm a big fan of him and Bad Robot, his company. Um, I'm a fan of Apple TV Plus. You know, Cha Cha Real Smooth, one of my favorite films of this past year. Coda, an Oscar-winning film. They've done a lot of great things. Ted Lasso. So I was very on board with this. I was like, it looks like Winnie the Pooh set in like a modern lens. But I was wrong. This one was kind of boring. And this one is actually one of the longest short films. This comes in just under 40 minutes. And it just feels like it drags so much. It's trying to be this like kind of sweet, sentimental story, kind of like Winnie the Pooh, but it feels almost like a ripoff of Winnie the Pooh because the dialogue itself isn't smart enough. The characters aren't witty or memorable or entertaining enough. Honestly, they all feel kind of one-dimensional and flat, and every single line of dialogue in this thing felt like it was ripped off of a Hallmark greeting card or thank you card, like this word of inspiration, but it just felt a little unnatural. It felt like almost they were trying to like cram all these like really sentimental, inspiring sentences down your throat without really finding a really good connective tissue. I think there are charming moments, especially with the animation, and I think that's why I put it above the Flying Sailor. Is it at least gave me enough to chew on visually, to where I think that's the one strength of the animated films, especially. They really can stretch the medium. But otherwise, I was left very disappointed, especially because I think it is the front runner because of who's behind it, J.J. Abrams as a producer, and because it's on Apple TV Plus. It has the distributor thing going for it. But I would not be surprised if this got upset because I think it's gotten a lot of hype, and when people see it, the hype kind of doesn't feel justified. Moving on to number 3, though, we have My Year of Dicks, and this is the one, of course, that got all the laughs from Riz Ahmed when he named it as a nomination. Speaking of Riz Ahmed, he won a short film Oscar last year. My Year of Dicks, though, it seems like something that you put on. You're like, oh, this feels like an Adult Swim kind of like profane, like not my cup of tea. Like it's going to be off-putting to some of the older members of the Academy. But then you end up watching it, and it's actually a really down-to-earth, really charming story of coming of age. There's an edge to it that you would see in something like maybe Booksmart, or a lot of people have compared it to Freaks and Geeks. I haven't seen Freaks and Geeks, but some people are saying like this is a very spiritually companion piece to that type of style. But it just focuses on this girl in these multiple chapters of her life as she's trying to lose her virginity. Kids, or not kids, but teenagers, at this age, a lot of ideas that we as adults look back on. Teens have a different perception on certain life events and a certain heightened experience when navigating things like sex and coming of age in general, and romantic relationships and non-romantic relationships as well. And I think that's what's so interesting about this film is it kind of comes from this personal place, but it's almost an adult reflection on adolescence, but still understanding what that adolescence felt like. And I think the animation style here is really interesting. Each kind of different chapter is about a different man she encounters as she grows into this kind of young woman, and how she kind of has these different episodes with these guys. And with each different episode, we kind of get a new kind of animation style. There's one that's anime. And ultimately, I was really, really swept up by the visuals in this thing. I do think because of its episodic nature, I almost would have liked this to become like a series, and like actually seen it expanded. I think this is one of the shorts that could have been expanded, but I really thought it was solid. I think it's getting a lot of hate just because people think it's a little vulgar, but they haven't seen it if they think it's vulgar. Because I think if you watch it, you realize it's really not that vulgar. It's really not out of the ordinary. It feels very relatable, very personal to everyone who goes through adolescence and understands what coming of age entails in a really honest fashion. And I think it's really, really good. So I would not be upset to see this win. At number 2, we have An Ostrich Told Me the World is Fake, and I think I believe it. It's a long title. This is one that at first I was like, all right, where's this going? It follows this guy. He's essentially this kind of like claymation stop motion figure in like this office space. And what I like about the animation here is they make it very known that these are like animated figures. They're not trying to fool you into any sort of realism. You see the creases, you see the edges, And that is because you're also kind of seeing the behind the scenes as you're watching the action of this office place happen. You're also seeing the animators' hands working the scene around it. It's really cool. It's a really nice introspective of the scene with the behind the scenes all simultaneously happening at once. It's a little hard to describe with words, so I highly recommend you go check this out. I believe it's on Vimeo, and like see what I mean. But it is really interesting animation wise. But I was like, where is this going story wise? And then about halfway through, we get that ostrich, the titular ostrich, who says the world is fake. And then you start to realize that the world that is being alluded to as fake is the world of film. And the idea that this character is essentially self aware that he is in the middle of a stop motion film. And I think that's just so funny and such a great clever premise. And it's one of those films that it knows exactly how long it has to be, and it kind of stretches the premise enough and then gets out when it's ahead. You know, it doesn't try to overstay its welcome. And I really, really like that. This reminded me of the Lego movie, kind of that idea of, oh, we are in a bigger universe, but we are this inanimate object, but to us, this is life. And I thought that was just so interesting. And I think this is something that I think I'm going to revisit as time goes on. And if I had to pick one that I think I would enjoy watching again, it's this one. I really, really like this one. But at number one, we have Ice Merchants. This was my favorite because it had that like real emotional core. This follows a father and his son who have this like hillside, or not hillside, but I guess it's mountainside home in this big like hunk of ice, this cliff essentially, where they parachute every day to deliver ice. They sell their ice from the mountains, from the cliffs, to this small village below. And then you start to see there's a little bit of a commentary on like global warming and the fact that the ice begins to melt, and their home isn't necessarily this safe space anymore because it's built on the side of an icy cliff. And you see that when the ice begins to melt, what that means for the home. But then you see how this relationship evolves because of this, and to see where these characters end up. It's a very sweet and simple little film on the surface, but the more you think about it, the more you look at it, the more you digest it, you realize it's saying a lot more about the topics of relationships and the father-son bond, and of course, like I said, the global warming stuff. I think it's got a lot of good messaging, but it doesn't feel forced, and I like that a lot. You can just kind of enjoy it as a simple story as is, and it is an emotional story. It has some really emotional beats, some really sentimental beats. It'll have you, you know, kind of wiping your tears, patting your tears from your face. Maybe not a full-on like sob-worthy film, but I really, really felt charmed by this film, and I love the animation style. It's really only using a series of blues and reds. There's really no other color going on here, but it still feels visually vibrant. I think all five of these shorts feel very distinctly unique in their animation styles, which is very refreshing to see, considering, you know, some of the past winners the past few years have been like that CG Pixar feel, and I like that feel too. But every single animation here is the furthest from Pixar as you can get. You have hand drawn stuff, stop motion stuff, and then in this sense, like really nice sketched drawn stuff. So I'm really a fan of these films, but especially Ice Merchants. I think it's really emotional, really great. There are some spoiler moments that I won't spoil now, obviously, but I think if I had a favorite, it would be Ice Merchants. I'm gonna get to my Oscar predictions in the future, I think tomorrow in a video. But if I had to say a favorite, I still think The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, because it's got Apple backing it and J.J. Abrams. I think that's going to kind of be the one where if people didn't see all these, or they just want to go for something they recognize, they might go for it. But I'm hoping the people that watch these shorts realize that there are other higher quality shorts amongst the bunch. And I would like to see Ice Merchants win because of that. I think My Year of Dicks, some people may not vote for it because of the title and they didn't bother to watch it, but I think if they watch it, they may vote for it. And the other two, I just think are too short, to where I don't know if the Academy is necessarily going to consider them as highly as the others. But it'll be an interesting race because I think this one could be one of the closer ones. But let's move on to live action short. These ones also had some pretty low lows, but I think the number one film, which I'll talk about, was my favorite short of all 15, animation, live action, and documentary. So let's get into it. Number 5, we have Evalu. Evalu is not a bad short by any means, but it is one of those instances where it's so short that I feel like I was just settling into the film when it was kind of like hitting its peak and kind of resolving things. And I wish it had taken more time to get to the revelation, because a lot of this film is built in the secret. There's this mystery that this girl's sister is gone. Her little sister this little sister's looking for her older sister, and she's like, "Where's Ivalu?" This is her sister's name, Ivalu. And it takes place in this really gorgeous Greenland setting, and I think the Greenland setting is gorgeous to look at. But I was just so entranced by the visuals that I was like, "Oh yeah, what's this story? There's this mystery. This girl's missing." And then I was finally getting into it, and they immediately kind of gave us this plot twist. And I like what it has to say about children being a little bit naive or unwilling to accept some harsh truths in their realities, and the idea that they kind of create these false realities for themselves, and then eventually when they do kind of come to realization of what the truth actually is, there's a real sadness and tragedy about that. But I think it was just all too rushed because it was so short, and I think the Academy will feel a similar way. I think it's just a little too abstract to then finally give you like this big revelation and climax just a few minutes in. It just felt a little unsatisfying as a short, and I think this is one that actually could have benefited from a maybe a bit more extended runtime. Number four, we have Night Ride. Night Ride is a little bit more complicated. It takes place on this cold December night as this woman waits for a train. The train or the tram finally gets to her, but then the driver's like, "I need to take my 30-minute union break," or whatever. So she's like, "F it. I'm going to go on the tram anyway because I want to stay warm. I don't want to wait out here in the cold." And then she ends up like hijacking this tram, which at first I was like, "Oh, that's like not okay. Like that's dangerous." But at the same time, I was like, "That's kind of a clever idea, a clever gag. Like, oh, let's see what this stranger does driving this tram." But then it kind of takes an interesting direction where a trans woman on the train gets kind of harassed by these gentlemen who are transphobic. And I think there's an interesting film in there about kind of the underdogs sticking up for one another, or the minority sticking up for one another in the face of adversity. But I think when you set up this premise to be the silly little comedy about this woman taking this tram, and then immediately it's like, boom, now we're going to get into the social issues and violence and bullying and transphobia and all this stuff. It felt a little bit muddled in terms of, again, having a short film and having to tell this big story in such little time. I think there are clever comedic gags in that first half, and I think there are really nice themes and lessons to be learned from that second half. I just don't necessarily know if the two halves and the two tones blended too well, but I think it does have a pretty satisfying resolution. I liked how it ended. You kind of get a good comeuppance moment from these underdogs, these minorities. I won't spoil anything else, but I do think it's one that's a little hit or miss for me, but not the worst of this bunch. And I don't think it's as offensive as some are making it out to be. Some people are saying it's like a Green Book type thing where it's like, oh, one person's trauma is aiding someone else's success. But we do see that this main character also faces adversity being a little person. So I don't necessarily agree 100% with that sentiment, but I do understand where they're coming from. And I do think if you are sensitive to that idea of using violence towards LGBT members to further a narrative, and you're icked out by that, that's fine. I mean, Knock at the Cabin just came out, and I had issues with that because I thought the excessive trauma that the gay couple was going through, that it bothered me. It sucked to see, even though that was like the point of the movie. It's always hard to watch sometimes certain groups of people or certain individuals treated a certain way on screen, especially in the functionality of an overall bigger picture, bigger story for another character's arc. So I get that. I get that criticism, and that is why I think I still am struggling to figure out where I would place this. But right now it's at number 4. At number 3, we have Le Pupille, which was kind of the front runner for a little while. Alfonso Cuarón produced it, so he's the big name on the ticket there. And I think a lot of people, if they see this, they'll see Disney Plus, Alfonso Cuarón, check the box. Kind of like what I was talking about with The Boy and the Horse and the Mole, or whatever, with J.J. Abrams and Apple TV Plus. The only difference here that I think is holding it back from a win is the fact that it's an international film, and sometimes they tend to go for more English language films in this category. But as for the film itself, it's a really charming little story about these schoolgirls who are in a very strict, like, religious school. And they have like this Christmas party, and it's all about how kind of like the authority controls how these girls should behave, or kind of using religion as a means for saying like, oh, you should do the right thing and do this or do that or do this or do that. And you kind of see this rebellion take place. It's not like an outwards, in your face, like Matilda-esque rebellion where these kids are going to get up and sing Revolting Children on the cafeteria tables, but there is like kind of like a quiet sense of rebellion, started by like one girl that kind of trickles out. And this film has some really, really satisfying moments of that, with these kids kind of standing up for themselves. It's a really cute, charming little film. I think it's a little long to where I was kind of waiting for the action to really pick up. But once it picks up, I think it's really, really satisfying and a really charming short. At number two, we have An Irish Goodbye. And this kind of feels like a really nice companion piece to Banshees of Inisherin. It's got that Irish comedy that we love to see, kind of that kind of straight lace, straight face, kind of, deadpan humor, that works really, really well. This follows two brothers after their mother untimely passes away. And you see these brothers, one who has moved away from home, coming home, and then his brother who is a Down syndrome man, living um, in Ireland, Northern Ireland, and basically they have to decide what they're going to do with their family farm, but they also have this bucket list of what their mother wanted to accomplish in her life, and they kind of have this dual story thing going on, where half of it's like the serious stuff of dealing with the house and the arguments of like, oh, I want to stay home, oh, but you were never home, and you've been absent, so how can you make this decision? These like really deep themes that come with like grieving and like dealing with loss, but in a more like practical sense of like, what do we do with the home and what do we do with all these things? But then you have the fun side, which is going through the bucket list, and it creates some really, really clever, humorous gags. There's this one hilarious moment where the mother wanted to go in a hot air balloon, so they tie all these balloons to her urn and it flies away. It's a little morbid, some of these scenes, but I thought it was really funny, and it really works with this style of comedy, and I was really charmed by it. I think a lot of people are going to like this one because it is short, it's sweet, it has a good message, and ultimately it is this brotherly love story that I think a lot of Academy members are going to really cling to, and certainly I did as well. But number one, and this is my favorite short amongst all 15 of them, and this is The Red Suitcase, or La Valise Rouge. This is a film. I'm gonna look up where it's from. Luxembourg. It's from Luxembourg, which is also just so cool. Just Luxembourg cinema. It's so cool seeing different places in the world getting their films represented, and let alone being this good. I mean, I love, love, love the short. It's about this girl, this Iranian teenager. She's 16 years old, and she gets off at the airport, and she goes through customs, and she has this red suitcase, and the people at security and customs are like looking at her, trying to like see what's the deal with the suitcase, because she's like holding it very close to her. They're like, oh, is this like a dangerous suitcase? What's up with this? And they open it up, and it's just a bunch of like art supplies, and it's like her personal belongings. But then you find out why she's holding it so close and why she's kind of on edge this whole time. And it's because essentially she has been sent to become a child bride in Luxembourg. And it's kind of that jarring thing that washes over, where it's like, oh shoot, like this went from like suspenseful and mysterious to like huge stakes and like super relevant, but also like traumatic and terrifying all at once. But the film doesn't try to be like this like super crazy suspense movie. It instead just kind of lives in the moment. And it is super suspenseful, but not because it's trying to like go for all these really horror-esque shots and sequences and stagings of things. It's just existing in the moment, but because the characters and the actors are playing these roles so well, and because it's just such a well timed and paced film, we feel those stakes 100% of the way through, and it feels just so suspenseful because of it. And I was on the edge of my seat this whole time, wanting this girl to get out of this airport before she would be succumb to this terrible life that she didn't want. Child slavery is something that, and child brides is something that I have not seen a ton of media on, but every time I see it, it gives me that pit in my stomach. It makes my heart hurt. And I think this film tackles these issues with a lot of good intention and really good respect toward the victims of this, and really giving this girl her own identity and her own power. But it is, like I said, very suspenseful, but not because it's trying to be overly suspenseful, but just because it presents its stakes. It makes its audience feel its stakes, feel its emotions. I would love this one. And it all takes place in this one little airport, which I also like the idea that every corner she turns, this man could be there standing with flowers ready to take her away. And she has to kind of try to escape this airport. It's just such a harrowing film. And I think it's not just my favorite documentary nominated, but it may be one of my favorite films nominated for an Oscar. It's definitely in my top 10 films nominated for Oscars this year. I think it's so powerful. And when you do have the chance to see it, I know this is the one that's least accessible, which sucks. But I do recommend, if you can get your hands on this film, watch this film. The final shot of this film is one of the most harrowing, jarring shots I've ever seen. And I keep thinking about it. And I don't know how they did it. It's one of those things where it's like all practical, but you're like, how did they make that effect happen? And if you've seen the film, you know what I mean. But yeah, that's my ranking for best live action short. Now we're moving on to documentaries, and while the documentaries, none of these were like the best I've seen all year in terms of like films. I don't think any of these were bad. I think this was the most consistent in terms of like my number 5 is a great documentary. It just didn't speak to me as much as the other 4, but I think a lot of these documentaries are better than the worst in the other categories, if that makes sense. So my number 5 is the Martha Mitchell effect, and this centers around the story of Martha Mitchell, who was an integral part of the Watergate scandal. She was on the side basically combating Nixon and kind of, was instrumental in getting that whole Watergate scandal exposed. And the Martha Mitchell effect, if anyone doesn't know the term, it's kind of like a gaslighting type thing where it's when someone is like falsely accused of something, and then turns out that they weren't lying after all, and they were right the whole time. And that's kind of what Martha Mitchell was. Her deal was that people were like, "Oh, shame on her, shame on her," but at the end they're like, "Oh wait, no, she was doing the right thing." And it kind of dives into that. I think the reason I put it at number 5 is just because it is all archival footage. There's no like actual testimony of now, and I think that's what kind of separates it from some of the other documentaries. Is a lot of these other ones are right current, in the now, and you can kind of get that perspective of a modern lens on it, whereas here it's all archival. And I don't think there's a problem with that. It's just I would have liked I do like the other documentaries because there's more of like that personal connection to the audience. There's someone speaking to the audience, someone actually like reaching out and making it feel a little bit more personal. But I think as a history lesson, this is a really good documentary. It's really well structured. I think this is something that could be shown in history classes when they study Nixon. I think this is a really solid doc. And number 4, we have Stranger at the Gate. And this one has been kind of subject to a lot of controversy. It deals with this man telling his story about how he was going to bomb this Muslim church, and he ended up not, because he like kind of made this connection with these Muslim people and basically realized that his anti-Semitic views were wrong. And I think that's in itself a powerful and crazy and wild story, that this even happened, that this man was going to do these things. It's absolutely awful and horrible to think about. But then the fact that he was able to have his mind changed by the power of just listening and understanding, I think that's really powerful. And there's a really powerful sentiment to be made. I have seen a lot of the criticisms about like, why do, the Muslim people have to be the ones to educate the people who are ignorant? And I totally understand that perspective 100%. And I think if you're turned off by that fact, that like, basically if these Muslim people hadn't been nice to him, he would have followed through with his plan. I think it could be a bit jarring and off-putting, and I totally get people's disdain for this film because of it. I personally think, it's well-intentioned. I think it's meant to show that, just opening your ears and your eyes and just listening to people is the way to go, and you shouldn't be so close-minded, and you should, listen to people before you make a judgment about their culture and who they are, and not just judge them based on, the cover of the book and what society has told you marks someone as suspicious or a person of interest. I hate stereotypes, and I think this film kind of shows that his stereotypes and his ignorance was almost his downfall. But I do think because you get a lot of it from his perspective, and a lot of the beginning of the film is him explaining what he was going to do, it kind of leaves like a sour taste in your mouth, for it to then kind of transform into something really helpful and thoughtful and eye-opening later. But I do think the criticisms are warranted, even though I was still left pretty affected by this particular story. And I think because it's a documentary, I'm a little bit more forgiving, because this is a true story. This actually happened. This is what actually happened. This is a document of real life. And none of this is fictionalized. I think if it was in a fictional sense, it would have been a little bit more off-putting, but I think because it actually happened, I think that makes for a pretty powerful documentary. At number 3, we have The Elephant Whisperers. There really isn't a lot to say about this other than elephants are really cute, and this film does a good job showing it and showing why we should love wildlife and we should love the animals, especially elephants. And there are some sad moments involved with, like, the hardships some elephants face in the wild, and just the idea of forest fires and little things like that. But ultimately, it's about this woman's love for elephants. And honestly, in a crop of some documentaries that are a little heavier, like Stranger at the Gate, or like the next one we're going to talk about, or some of the animated or live action ones like The Red Suitcase, or Ivalu, I think there's a little bit of a breath of fresh air. It's really nice to see, especially the past few years. The documentary and live action shorts have been a little heavy. So I think when you just get one that shows these really cute elephants in their environment, I think that's all you can ask for, and it makes for a very sweet doc. At number 2, we have Haul Out. Haul Out is a film that I don't want to spoil. If you've seen clips or little pictures of this, you know what it's about. It's about a certain animal, but I'm not going to spoil what the animal is because I didn't know, and it basically sets it up with no context. It's just this man in his like little cabin in the middle of like this shore side in a seemingly cold area, or previously cold area. This is a film about climate change, and how the melting of ice is causing some animals to relocate, and because of the relocation, they are all suffering because of it. And I won't tell you what animal it is, but the way they introduce the animal is so interesting because it's like this man just going about his day. You have no context, no backstory whatsoever, and then he opens the door, and there are not just a few of these animals, not just like 100 of these animals, but there's like thousands and tens of thousands of animals all outside this guy's door, all lining these shores and these beaches. And it's so jarring and so, at first, kind of comedic that you're like, holy crap, like they got this on camera. I can't believe it. And then it kind of gets into the more serious aspect of, oh, this is because they can't be on ice because all the ice is melted and they're effed. Essentially, I'm not going to curse here, but they're essentially effed because they have nowhere to go and they kind of resort to this one location. And you start to see that takes its toll because of stampedes and just not having this comfortable environment and having to basically fend for themselves in an environment that's foreign to them. I think it's so tragic and so sad. And the reason I didn't put it at 1 is because there is a little bit of not animal violence, but there are some images of unfortunately deceased animals that is hard to watch. But I do think it definitely aids in the effect the film is trying to have in showing that climate change is wrong because it leads to this. And this is so important because of what it's saying. I think this and Elephant Whispers are very similar. They're about animals and they kind of strike that chord with the audience, but I think this has a lot more to say. I just think this is a little deeper than Elephant Whispers, and that's why I put it above it, even though I think they both function in a similar sense. But this one just was a little bit deeper to me. And I like the use of documentary to really not explain anything and kind of just show, not tell. At the very end, they kind of explain what you've kind of been watching this whole time, but you can kind of piece it together just by viewing it. And I kind of like that experimentation in a documentary. Anyway, moving on to my number 1, though. This is one that I haven't seen a lot of people put as their number 1, but it just kind of struck that chord with me, and it's How Do You Measure a Year? This is such a charming short. It doesn't have any of the glitz and glam of any of these other shorts. It's filmed on a pretty basic camera. It's Jay Rosenblatt's follow-up to his When We Were Bullies short last year, which didn't get great reviews, but still got nominated. It doesn't have anything to do with that film, but it is his second film nominated for Best Documentary Short. But this is a film following a daughter. It's Jay Rosenblatt himself, his daughter. He's filming her for 18 years from her second birthday to her 18th birthday. So I guess it's 16 years. But he's filming her and asking her the same exact questions when she's 2, 3, 4, 5, and going all the way to 18. And they're pretty big questions. One of them is like, what is power? And as a 2-year-old, she's like, I don't know. And then she points at her vagina because she thought he asked, what is powder? Powder? And it's like funny moments like that where as a kid, you're like asking, what is the meaning of life? And this kid's like, what? But then seeing as she gets older, and first off, the visual to see this girl grow before your eyes, it reminded me of Boyhood, Richard Linklater's Boyhood, where you're like, oh my God, this girl's like literally aging in front of her eyes. that was just so interesting to see. It's such a great experiment of film. It uses film in an interesting medium to kind of show something that isn't shown a lot in cinema. But I also liked how it showed kind of what a young person's view on life is as they grow older. And you start to see when she turns like 12, 13, 14, she kind of gets sick of this project to an extent. She's like, yeah, okay, are we done yet? Or kind of tired. I kind of want to go lay down. Like one of the years, her question is like, what do you love most in life? And she goes, sleeping. um and then at the end, when she's 18, she's about to go to college, so you see there's a little bit more sentimentality there. And I just love seeing this journey. It's very simple. This is something that could be put together on iMovie by anyone in the world, but I think because it is just so raw and personal, I think it's the most relatable. I think anyone could look at this and kind of see themselves. I'm a very rooted person in home videos. I love home videos. I'm so rooted in that. I'm so, obsessed with going back and watching home videos, not just of me, but of my siblings, of my parents, their home videos. So I just think this struck a perfect chord for me where I just saw my life kind of flash before my eyes when I watched this. I kind of reflected on my own life and, thinking about what are my attitudes as a 2-year-old versus an 18-year-old and what has stayed the same. And the thing that stays the same in this girl's sense is her passion for singing. And it's really sweet to see her not only just grow as a singer, because she is like an okay singer when she's young, but she ends up being like a really good singer when she's 18. But also seeing how, like, no matter what curveballs life throws at you, something like that, a passion can still remain consistent. And a love between father and daughter can still remain consistent. They talk a lot about their relationship and how it sometimes pulls apart and ebbs and flows. And I think that's really thoughtful too, and really powerful and courageous of Jay Rosenblatt to put that out there and say, like, I'm not the best dad all the time, but this is a real relationship and this means something. So this really struck a chord with me. I think all 5 documentaries are really strong, but that would be my pick. As for what I think is gonna win these categories, like I said, I think animated short is gonna be The Boy, the Mole, Fox and the Horse. I think live action is gonna be An Irish Goodbye. I think Banshees is riding a nice wave, and I think this is like kind of that mindset where they're like, "Oh, I like this one. This reminded me of Banshees a little bit." Not in its subject matter, just in its style and tone. And then documentary, I think The Elephant Whispers is the one that kind of covers the most bases. It's sweet, it's charming, it'll make you cry, it'll make you smile. It's about animals. It's a Netflix distribution, so it's like widely accessible, easily accessible. So that's what I'm going with now. But tomorrow I will have my final Oscar nominations posted, so you guys will get to see. Maybe I'll change my mind on some of these ones, these 3, but really solid year for shorts. If you want to check them out, most of them are available on like Netflix or Vimeo or Hulu or YouTube. The New Yorker put a lot of them up. There's some that aren't available elsewhere, but if you search the deep web, you'll find them. And I hope they're still playing in some theaters out there, because there are still some theaters showing these shorts. You guys have a few days till the Oscars, so have at it. These are short films for a reason. They're meant to be consumed a lot at a time. So you can watch all 15 of these in a day. So I highly recommend you do so, or watch as many as you can, or at least the ones I recommended, because I love a lot of these films. The Red Suitcase especially is like one of my favorite films of 2022 now. So thank you guys so much for watching. As I said, Oscar predictions will be out tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.